Go.
Welcome to Writer Mother Monster. I'm your host, Lara Ehrlich, and this is a special episode about an issue so many women experience but so few people discuss. Writer mothers Shannon Gibney and Kalia Yang are here to talk about writing motherhood and miscarriage. Please share your thoughts and questions with us in the comments section, and we'll weave them into our conversation. Now, I'm honored to introduce Shannon and Kalia Yang, co-editors of the anthology What God is Honored Here, Writings on Miscarriage and Infant Loss by and for Indigenous Women and Women of Color. Shannon Gibney is an award-winning author of books of all kinds, from novels to anthologies to essays to picture books. The through line in all of her work is stories that may have previously gone untold because the speakers have not had an outlet for their stories, or because the stories carry darkness and fear that we prefer to look away from. Kirkus described her most recent book, Dream Country, as a necessary reckoning of tensions within the African diaspora, an introduction to its brokenness and a place to start healing. Shannon is a professor of English at Minneapolis College, where for over 12 years she's worked with refugees, ex-offenders, international and in-country immigrants, Indigenous and communities of color, and students from all walks of life to tell their stories and achieve their academic and professional goals. Her children are 11 and 6, and her third child would be 7. She describes writer motherhood as exhilarating, exhausting, hilarious. Kalia is an award-winning Mo-American writer. She is the author of the memoirs The Late Homecomer, a Mo family memoir, The Song Poet, and Somewhere in the Unknown World. She is also the author of the children's books A Map into the World, The Shared Room, and The Most Beautiful Thing. Kalia's work has been recognized by the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Chautauqua Prize, the PEN USA Literary Awards, and the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. Her books for children have been recognized as notable books by the American Library Association and Kirkus's Best Books of the Year, and have received the Zolotow Honor and a Heartland Booksellers Award. Kalia is the recipient of 4 Minnesota Book Awards and the Ordway Center's Sally Award for Social Impact. She has 3 children, ages 7 and 5, and describes writer motherhood as hectic, rewarding, fast. Now, please join me in welcoming Shannon and Kalia. Hello,
Hi,
ladies.
everyone. Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, so before we get into conversation, I'd love to invite Kalia to read a little bit from the book that you co-edited. A little later, we'll hear from Shannon. And am I right, Kalia and Shannon, that you'll read a little bit of your personal experiences?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
great. Thank you so much. And Kalia, take it away.
Thank you. So I will be reading from In the Month of August. The early morning nurses and the doctors visited. They said, "Not yet." We shook our heads. They put more medication inside of me. I could tell because there were no shadows in the room, just the shine of the sun from the window, the wash of light from the fluorescent bulbs overhead. I wanted to go to the bathroom. My husband helped me up from the bed. He held my hand and we walked to the bathroom, much as we had on numerous other occasions, inside the safety of walls, within the hold of nature. He might have even swung our hands, as was his habit. Inside the bathroom, our walk was done. We stood side by side. I looked at his shoulder. He closed the door. For a moment, he held me in his arms, and the world was very far away. He said into my hair, "You have to let go." My arms fell from around him. I felt something drop in my belly, the weight I had been harboring deep inside of me, the child we had made but could not keep. The baby came, a little boy, mouth open like a little bird, a little boy who looked like a version of me, eyes closed, skin translucent, a little boy who weighed nothing in my arms. Despite the weight I had felt with him inside of me, The weight of life, the weight of hope, the weight of humanity, the gravity of my little love story. His body was more light than anything else it could have ever been. That autumn we took long walks. I thought I should sit down and write. I couldn't. The emptiness was vast inside of me. I felt hollow as the wind shifted and the weather turned. The flowers I loved started to die, one by one. The cold grew inside of me until I wished I could melt it away. The contradictions in what I felt and what I wanted were not lost on me. My feet meandered from the grass to the sidewalk to the very edge of the highways, to a high bridge over water, to the edge of that very river that sliced through America, the great Mississippi River, flowing far and fast from the future to the past. The doctors told me that if he had been a week older, baby Jules would have been classified as a stillbirth. They called him a miscarriage. I thought of the medical definition of the word, a spontaneous loss of a fetus before the 20th week of pregnancy. I kept looking, I kept thinking. There was nothing spontaneous about what I had experienced. Spontaneous in the world of writing signifies a surprise, an intervention, a positive impulse. My world of writing had nothing to do with the world I was living in anymore. In the days after, we went through our lives, a piece at a time, looking for the parts that could hold him. A ghost baby, a dream baby, a baby that was, but never will be. I looked at autumn, my favorite season, as I had never seen it before, barren, full of bold promises waiting to die. Words made no more sense. My annual garden, dollar store pots full of cheerful blooms, my geraniums, marigolds, begonias, impatiens, could continue living, but I didn't want them to. I stopped watering them. I watched them die. The blooms withered first, and the leaves started drying out in the sun and the strong winds. I thought about watering them in those final days, but my heart was so heavy I could not find the strength. What did a few more days of bloom matter, when in the end we would all die anyway? The autumn passed between moments of life feeling almost normal, me talking to the people I love who loved me, trying to find perspective, and then other moments when I wished I had never met my husband and fallen in love with him, gotten married, gotten pregnant, when I wished I had never delivered a dead baby into the world, a baby the world would never know as mine. Then I would cry and cry and cry until there were no more tears, until the throbbing in my heart grew stronger than the beat of my own heart. And that is from In the Month of August, from What God Has Honored Here.
Thank you, Kalia. Thank you also for your bravery and for reading your personal experience here today. I really appreciate it. I'm sure listeners do as well. And really quick, just to kick us off, so according to March of Dimes, about 10 to 20% of known pregnancies end in miscarriage. It is believed that approximately 50% of all pregnancies, those might be pregnancies before a woman knows that she is pregnant, end in miscarriage. And yet it's something that so few talk about. So thank you both for this anthology of women's stories. It is such a vital resource for women who are going through this often in silence. So tell us a little bit about your own experience. Kalia, thank you for reading your own experience, but tell us, how did you feel as though you had to suffer this loss in silence? And that's a question for Shannon too. Or did you feel able to speak about it at the time?
No, I'm a very open person. And so when I was expecting my first child, it was very public. You know, I told my friends on social media. I wasn't hiding the experiences that I was feeling in my body. My mother had suffered 7 miscarriages. And so I knew that it was possible. And yet, you know, miscarriage is not something that a writer yearns to understand from that place. And yet it was a story that came upon me. And when I went through my experience, I posted on social media. I was so taken aback. I had no idea that it was possible to love a baby in the process, and that the world couldn't quite feel my grief with me, or there were no places where I could express that. And so I went to social media, and that was how Shannon Gibney first came upon this loss. Um, and so, yeah, I've always been an open person, and there was nothing to indicate to me that I should be silent about this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Kalia suffered her loss about a year before mine, and so I saw that post. We are both writers based in the Twin Cities. Um, there's a growing number of us BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color writers, but there's not that many of us, so we all know each other, and so we follow each other's work, and we were friends, and but sort of more like acquaintances, kind of, and so yeah, so I saw that post, and it affected me, but then of course it's like things affect you one way when they're not you, and they affect you a different way when you experience them yourself. So I, about a year later, was pregnant with my second child, and I was 41 and a half weeks pregnant. So the baby was 10 days late. And I went into labor. I started having some contractions, and I went into my midwifery clinic, and they tried to find the heartbeat and they couldn't find it. And it was at that point that I was rushed to the hospital, and I'll read a little bit from that section later on in my piece in the book, sort of detailing what happened. But yeah, I mean, the shock of it, right? I think Kalia really sort of hit the nail on the head, which is just, it's sort of like, these things happen, but you just don't think it's going to happen to you, and there's a lot of different reasons for that, but yeah, definitely there's a big cultural silence around this. So Kalia and I, in talking about the process of getting this book together, we always say that, we were doing what writers do, which is looking in literature to reflect our experience as a way to start to heal. I think as a way to start to put some of that trauma in perspective. I don't want to say get rid of it or anything, because it's there. It's still there, but both of us in our own ways, or each of us in our own ways, in our own times, went looking for things, any books or movies and articles, and we just were, especially around Indigenous and women of color, we were not finding things that really spoke to us. I don't know, Kalia, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it was just about, I think, several weeks, maybe a month after Shannon's loss. And she was also very open about it on social media. At the same time, we were pregnant at the same time. Shannon was a little bit before me, but I was in the hospital because I put on water weight that week. It was particularly hot in Minnesota. And so I gone in to see the doctor, and they were a little bit concerned about the water weight. And so they wanted to know if I wanted to induce. It was time, did I want to induce? I turned on my social media as I was trying to make this decision, this hard decision in the doctor's office, and I saw a post from Shannon Gibney. And it was, if you're pregnant and it is time for your baby to come, then consider inducing, because the risk of stillbirth goes up the longer you wait. And so Shannon's post made the decision for me, the delivery of Xingyang, my firstborn, my daughter, or secondborn, first child that came to me alive. And so our stories then were linked in ways that we couldn't have predicted, Laura. And when Shannon wrote me about a month after her loss, and she said, Kalia, one day when you're ready, when I'm ready, would you ever want to put together something, because I've been looking. And I too had been looking. I spent a whole year looking. And so immediately I said yes. I said yes, when our childbearing years are through, when we're both ready. Um, let's do this. And that's exactly what we did. And that is then, of course, the seed of what God has honored here.
Yeah. Oh,
For
sorry.
both of us, there was no question that we had to deliver something to the world, something to the women who had experienced similar losses, something, I think, for each other and ourselves.
You said when you were ready to bring those stories together. When did you feel ready? How did you know you were ready? What was the decision around that process?
Shannon wrote me. I had after my daughter, I gave birth to identical twin sons, and I knew that was it for me. I had coded in the experience of delivering the boys, and so the risks were too high. And then one day, Shannon wrote me, and we met up at a coffee shop, at my favorite coffee shop in the cities from the days before this pandemic. And that really was where the conversation began. Shannon had by this time given birth to her youngest, Maui. And so she also knew that it was the end of those years. We could finally meet these stories and place them somewhere in the spectrum of our lives in ways that we couldn't have earlier. Before the boys, I would have never been ready to meet baby Jules in the way that I was able to, or that I am able to today. And so then the process started. And I think we were then ready to carry not only our own stories, but the gravity of others. I think there is that process that happens inside where the heart flowers up, and you can hold a lot more tears than you were able to before.
Yeah. How did you invite others to join you in this book? How did you find the other women?
So we have, extensive contacts ourselves. The writing world is small in general, and then for women of color and Indigenous women, it's even smaller. But also, we knew that there were people who maybe didn't consider themselves writers, who had stories to tell and just needed a push and some support and some access to create something powerful. And so we really wanted a representative collection. We really wanted to make sure that we had, Black women stories, that we had Latinx women's stories in there. We wanted to make sure that we had Native women's stories, and of course Asian American women's stories, and stories also, from Muslim women, not just women who identify as Christian. So we knew that we wanted that, but we also knew that we wanted the collection to be very strong writing. One thing that we talked a little bit about in the prep meeting for the show, Laura, was just how I understand that everybody processes things differently, but for me, it actually just increased my pain because it made me feel more isolated to encounter this kind of stock language around stillbirth and miscarriage, like, oh, my angel, now she's in heaven, and my heart will never be the same. It just this very and Kalia and I are both open people. I'm a little more blunt than she is, for sure. I think we could say that. Although when you get to know her, she's very blunt. But anyway, in the best way possible. But I just, when I read literature and stories, I want to be confronted with the truth, and I feel like especially around pregnancy and birth and infant loss, but I mean, a lot of other things in, women's bodies. I'm 46 now, and, I don't know how many more years I'll have until, I go through menopause, right? But that's another thing that, nobody really talks about, like what is that actually like in your body as a woman when you go through that, right? And so there's all these things that are like shrouded in mystery around women's bodies, right? And a lot of it is painful, difficult stuff. And so I just really wanted some stories of like, no, like this is what happened. This is how it felt when my baby, I rushed into the bathroom in the hospital, in my hospital room, because I thought I had to go to the bathroom, but actually it was my baby coming out. And there's like, I had to like balance one foot on the lever on the toilet, and three doctors had to rush in and catch her, and there was blood and gunk everywhere, and it's like I wanted that, I wanted that real visceral depiction of that, and I wasn't finding it anywhere. And so, and again, not in a sensational sense, but just like real. This is really what happens when you go through miscarriage or you lose a baby, and you lose a baby. And we do have, a piece in here about sudden infant death syndrome too, which is also, something horrifying and very sad that happens, right? So, and Rona Fernandez, who's the writer on that, just depicts that so vividly, and it breaks your heart, but it is incredibly well done, So that's really what we wanted. So we put out a call, and it really wasn't that laborious, I would say, like in terms of trying to figure out like, okay, how do we get the pieces that we need to make this like a full, really multifaceted collection. But I will say that I'm very glad that I had a partner like Kalia to work on with this, because a lot of people have said to us, oh my gosh, how could you go through all those stories of women losing babies? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to say it was easy. I'm certainly not going to say that it was fun. I will say that I felt and feel called to do this work. That's the kind of writers that both Kalia and I are. And that I think it would have been too much for one person. I really do. And so I'm very grateful that I had somebody to walk the journey with me, like Kalia, and it brought us closer together, definitely much closer together. We're really close now.
Kalia, I'll give you a moment if you had something to add, but I'd love to also hear about the process of editing the stories, while respecting the voice of the women who contributed, but just the logistics of word choice and narrative structure, all the craft parts of the stories that feel like they could possibly be antithetical to the raw emotion of the women writing the stories. So how you kind of put those things together. But first, Kalia, did you have something to add to what Shannon was saying?
I do. I think one of the most important things about this journey for me, and I think for Shannon and for all the contributors, is this community of women we found. Women across space and time, we knew that we were not alone. But in putting together this book, we felt our togetherness rise. And that was one of the gifts of this experience. For all of the hurting, there was in that so much hope and so much beauty, especially in those early launch events. In terms of the editing, I think one of the hardest things to ask is for our writers to linger. There were moments, and we knew those moments so real, when a writer wants to run fast across a landscape of trauma, a landscape of grief. And Shannon and I, one of the hardest things we had to ask was for our contributors to slow down. And some of them said, I can't right now, or I need more time. Or every time I try, all I find is tears. All I find is the space. And what Shannon and I had to do was write that very fine line between being sensitive to the needs of our writers, but also guiding this project along. Because we were a group moving in concert. We were going to the same place. We could only make it there if we didn't lose anybody along the way. And so I think that's really where the generosity of Shannon's heart and I think the patience of my own were able to come together. So beyond just the word choice, Laura, beyond just like the level of the language itself, and we wanted to give them creative freedom in terms of crafting the thing. And so Shannon and I didn't mess too much with structure. There were parts that we wanted them to linger, parts that needed to be, cut a little bit here and there. But we wrote this very fine line, understanding, I think, and this is where it's, this is not a book that Shannon or I would have voluntarily said, this is a book I want to write. This is a book I want to edit. And yet it was the project that had fallen upon us as writers. And I think when we said we would do it, there was a kind of responsibility that we were taking on that neither Shannon nor myself wanted to take lightly. And so that was the hardest part, definitely. I don't know if Shannon would agree, but I suspect so. Asking people to linger. When you say it's the face of miscarriage and the baby dropped into your hands, what happened? And it took a long time, but Sonia Kamal, one of our contributors, wrote, when the baby dropped in her hands, the baby's body slipped through her fingers, but the head was still there. The head the size of a quarter. And what to do with the face of your baby? Right, that question was the question that Sonia wanted to run by, and that was what I asked of her as an editor.
Yeah.
And her courage astounded me, and the thing that she wrote made Shannon and, our hearts pause for a bit of time. What was it for you?
Yeah, I mean, the immense bravery and brilliance, I think, of all our contributors in the collection. It pushed us through the really hard parts. And that doesn't mean that, there weren't moments, especially when the book came out or was about to come out, right, where people had differing responses, to certain descriptions of things. People maybe got like activated by some kind of discussion, and we had to work through some things, so I don't want to be romantic about organizing with BIPOC folks or women of color, because I do a lot of work in that area. So does Kalia. And I think that just, that makes things harder in the long run. Like people are people, regardless of our racial and cultural backgrounds and regardless of what we've been through and made it through and what we carry with us and what we've let go of. So there's always going to be things, but I feel like, we sort of talk about the process of making this book and certainly afterwards too, because now, we have a whole sort of group that we keep up with and share information and good news, stuff like this, right? If people want to jump on and watch and comment and whatnot. But we often say, Kalia and I, that it's the process of putting the book together is sort of like a template for processing trauma in a lot of ways for us.
And I'll just add, Laura, I think this is an important, it was certainly important for Shannon and for me throughout the process. But we were, there was the violence of what we had experienced. And then there was the violence from, in so many ways, white majority culture. From the very onset, when we published the call, we got personal messages from white people saying, why are you isolating us? Why are you excluding us? And then when we got the submissions, when people started submitting, white men submitted too. And when we, as women of color editors, made decisions and we said, I'm sorry, your piece is not a good fit for this collection, we got pushback, you know, and that continued on right to the evening of our launch event. There was a person whose social media icon was a rifle, and they posted in the launch page, you know, and so there were all of these forces that we were contending with beyond just the experiences that we had undergone or the experiences of collecting these voices into this collection. We were also meeting certain forces in the majority culture along the way where Shannon and I understood that there was always a measure of risk that we were taking. And I think at every point, every writer decides who you want to be, whether you're going to give in to these bigger forces that are trying to push down voices and presences like yours, or while you take up that space and you do so with dignity. And at every turn, Shannon and I chose, you know, we didn't respond personally, but we chose to do the work that was before us as courageously as possible. And in that way, mirrored the process and mirrored the courage that it took to undertake such a project and to carry through with it.
Yeah, no, that's unsurprising, but devastating to hear at the same time. And we talked a little bit about the need for a collection like this for BIPOC women, you know, Native women, women of color, Black women. But could we talk a little bit about the need for a collection like this for women, sort of specifically? Like when a man offers his perspective or his story about miscarriage, of course, their story is heartbreaking as well, and there's a pain and a loss there. But this is a collection for women and not, and as you said, the men's story is just not a right fit for this collection. Could you talk a little bit about um, the need for women's stories of loss and giving voice to what happens in a woman's body? And Shannon, you talked a little bit about the language surrounding that. We could talk a little bit about guilt and shame and the way women's bodies are portrayed in literature generally. Shannon, before during our planning meeting, you talked about how women's bodies are often objectified as sexy or desirable, and is there a place for women's bodies in other iterations? So I don't know. I just threw a lot at you, but I think you know what I'm getting at.
I mean, yeah, like I have a lot of favorite movies for a lot of different reasons, but Bridesmaids, and actually I think Kalia and I bonded on this random scene, right, where Kristen Wiig, you know, her character, and they're all trying on bridesmaids outfits, and then they discover that they've eaten like this really bad meat at this Brazilian restaurant, and it just ensues this like disgusting, hilarious, revolting scene where everybody just starts like vomiting and diarrhea and like whatever. And Kristen Wiig, I guess, in an interview talking about it, she was just like, you know, we're just not really allowed like body humor, like full body humor. She's like, I just wanted to do like a full on, unabashed, unapologetic, like women's body humor scene. And I think that's one of the reasons why, I mean, I love that scene. And so and it sort of ties into our conversation here because I do feel like, you know, there's these very particular ways that women are embodied in popular culture and in American dominant discourse, you know. And so, yeah, we're allowed to be objectified sexually, certainly. And, you know, in this sort of also like cult of motherhood, sort of as long as things are, you know, all your buttons are in a row, you know, and you know, you can be a mess as a mother, but you can't be like a grotesque mess. You know, you can't, we don't want to hear about the fluids. We don't want to see the fluids. We don't want to, you know, whatever, all that stuff. And so it's just sort of like, okay, yeah, we know that miscarriage and infant loss and, you know, dead babies happen. But we don't really want to know about like how that happens in the body and what that feels like. And like, what are the ramifications of that, like in terms of recovery and like all this stuff. Like we really don't want to hear about that as a culture. And so, I mean, yeah, like I feel like, and I think Kalia would be a good person to sort of talk about the domain of white men in the genre of memoir, right? I mean, it's been so dominant for so long. And so, I mean, that definitely is something that we want to shatter as well.
Shannon's absolutely right. And I think it's important for us to say, as women, and to speak to the truth of a bigger world, maternal health is incredibly understudied, right? When cars get into accidents, airbags are tested on men dummies, not women. And so across the board, when you start talking about marginalized women and their healthcare, there's like this dearth of studies. But even on the level of women, we're like, less than 30% of the research, I believe, is a statistic of all of the research that is done about how it is to be safe in our cars, or how medications affect our bodies. And so we're just underthought and underconsidered, in literature, yes, but also in the medical industry. And so for Shannon and I to put together this collection, we were speaking to all of that, as well as the history in this country and other countries about women and children and the separation. I'm thinking immediately about what's happening at our southern borders. I'm thinking about, in the Hmong context as refugees of war, what happened in Laos when the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America came and they said, we want your children to fight the war, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. Americans did not make boots, fighting, army boots for children. And so every time a bomb fell, because Laos is the most heavily bombed nation in the world, only the world didn't know it, it was the children whose boots fell off their feet first. That's how people knew that they killed children. In the African American context, we have this history of slavery. And then, of course, now the prison to the school to prison pipeline. There are so many reasons why women are separated from their children in this country that we as a country have never reckoned with. And this book, I think, brings all of that grief into focus. So beyond just the experiences of miscarriage and infant loss, we're talking about all of the forces that have created all these divisions, all these sad, broken mothers who have to be stronger than they are to hold intact some idea of family and legacy. And that Shannon and I knew at the onset that we were tackling all of these things, by focusing as writers, Lara, by focusing on the very specifics, we speak to the universal. And so that is exactly what we're doing here. I have younger sisters who are in graduate schools, and they read this book because I co-edited it. And I remember all three of them, after they came to that first launch event, they said, one of them had been a women and gender studies major, and she said, I wish we had a book like this. College women need books like this. This is also what happened to our bodies. And the fact is, as a women in gender studies student myself, there were no such books in my experience, And so there are all of these secrets that we are forced into hiding from each other, from other women, all along the way. And part of the work of this project is to begin to make some noise, to say we need representation in research, we need representation in literature, but more importantly, we need you to understand that our lives are important to the whole of this operation, the human experiment.
Thank you.
And
I don't know if you can see, but you've just got me like streaming tears here. Sorry, Shannon, go ahead.
You're great. You're great. And I mean, another thing that we talked about in the prep session too, Lara, was, something my mom, who's a former therapist, always says, which is that we're a grief averse culture. We don't want, and most Western cultures are, we don't want to deal with grief. I don't want to talk about, I don't want to appropriate Hmong culture, but to me, Kalia could talk about this much better than me. But I mean, Hmong culture, for example, I feel like has ceremonies and outlets in place, to help people productively channel their grief, in a way that we don't culturally have, in sort of predominant mainstream American culture. And that has all these ramifications, you can't let go of something if you haven't had it move through you, So then what does that do?
Yeah, and Shannon, something else that you mentioned in our planning session, this ties back to it. I was looking for this note. You said women as caretakers protect others from our own pain. Can you talk a little bit about that, about what our conditioning as caretakers sets us up for when experiencing loss like this?
Yeah, it looked like Kalia wanted to say something, and then I'll get to that.
No, Shannon, I was just thinking about how, yes, we have, rituals in place, but in this pandemic, all of those rituals for grief have been effectively, you know, obliterated. We cannot grieve together. That is the essence of communal grief, and we cannot grieve together. And so I think about that, and I think about the layering of that for women who have undergone miscarriage and infant loss in this pandemic. Because these are the undercurrents of our existences. They're not, they're not on pause because we're going through something else, right? These are just, and I cannot begin to conceive of what it must have been like for so many women who've experienced loss at this time. When our focus is on the magnitude of this big thing and all of the deaths related to COVID that we are suffering from. But of course, it's also layered and complicated. It is that onion of womanhood that nobody really wants to peel back the surface of. But I think this speaks directly to the responsibilities and roles of so many women as caretakers.
Totally. Yeah, no, thank you for that, current contextualization, of the work. And I was just reading actually a story in the Washington Post talking about grieving from the perspective of psychologists and therapists and whatnot. And I mean, I've definitely seen it with my friends who have lost loved ones during the pandemic. It just makes it so much harder when you cannot say goodbye and gather together with people. So yeah, that's another layer. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I mean, the story I shared with you just briefly, Laura, these launch events that we were able to have. The book launched in October of 2019. And so we had, probably a good 6 months of events at bookstores. We have a really vibrant, book industry and bookish culture here in the Twin Cities, and very supportive as well. So, we had launch events at the Loft Literary Center and St. Catherine University. We were very fortunate with that. But yeah, the audiences were always smaller than we thought they might be, again, because this is such a difficult topic, I think, for folks to embrace. But there was one woman that I remember, an older white woman, who came up to me after I read my piece, and this might actually be a good kind of segue into reading the section of my piece I'm going to read. And she said, you just said it. You just said it's dead. The baby's dead. She's like, and I don't know, she looked maybe in her 60s maybe. And she was like, I never felt like I could say that. Just say what had happened. I had to sort of dance around it delicately. She didn't make it. We lost her, or she's not here, or she's in heaven now, or whatever. But she's like, I never could just sort of lay out the bare truth of like, my baby died. She's dead. Because she's like, I knew that other people couldn't handle it. And so I had to take care of them and their emotional needs first. I mean, she didn't say it that way, but that was what she was saying, basically. And it just struck me. I mean, I felt like in this process, so many older women have come up to us and shared these stories, right, of earlier times when our culture was even more closed about these losses than we are now, and just the added layers of grief that created for them, that they are still working through now, because of course a woman is never going to forget a baby that she's had, ever, no matter what the outcome is, right? A friend told me her mom was on her deathbed and she wasn't ready to go. And then, everybody has different belief systems, but she saw her child that she had lost, her baby that she had lost. And then she was ready. So I'll read just a little bit from my piece. This is called CNA, The Trip Was Good. And this is, right after they rushed me to the hospital when they couldn't find the heartbeat in my midwifery clinic. They wheel me down several winding hallways with bright fluorescent lights and photos of lakes with cranes and geese. I try to steady my breathing, which I can feel is irregular. Finally, we come to the OBGYN ward, and they hurry me into one of the patient rooms. Bala is instructed to sit in the waiting room. An ultrasound machine, which I've been hooked up to many times before for routine checkups, sits beside the bed in my room. We're just going to see what's going on, says the doctor, looking me carefully in the eyes. She appears to be in her late 30s like me, and her thin blonde hair is pulled to the nape of her neck in a black plastic cloud. I nod. I don't want to be here. I lie down on the bed. The doctor sits on the chair beside me. She squirts some transmission fluid on my raised stomach, and an image of a baby lying on her back, feet up, comes onto the screen. The baby is not moving. The baby has no heartbeat. 2 more doctors come into the room and stand next to Amy, that's my midwife, who is seated in the corner. Okay, says the doctor with the ultrasound probe. So yes, the baby has no heartbeat. She puts the ultrasound probe down and stands up. I look from her back to the screen, and the baby still isn't moving. Okay, I say. I want to ask her how to get the heartbeat started again, but some part of my brain is telling me not to say that. I'm sorry, she says. I'm so sorry. I look to Amy, then each of the 3 doctors beside her. Discomfort drains their faces, though I can see they are trying hard to mask it. I wonder how it feels to have to tell a woman something like that, and then still be expected to remain professional. It must not be easy. I ask if I can go to the bathroom. Once inside the bathroom, I grip the sink until my knuckles are white and stare into the spotless mirror. The woman looking back at me has dark brown eyes that hold nothing. What was once a sharp chin is now round and plump. Her hair frizzes all over from the humidity. I turn on the faucet as high as it will go and flush the toilet. Then I scream. The woman in the mirror screams and lets go of the sink as she does it. She wonders if she is just a copy of herself today, and if her real self is back at home washing dishes. She does not want to go back into the patient room because she knows they will tell her what she has to do next, and she does not want to know what she has to do next. She does not want to leave the bathroom because she will have to say to her husband, "Our baby is dead." She does not want to call her mother because her mother will cry, and nothing will make her stop. She does not like to see or hear her mother cry. She will have to rewrite the story of the pregnancy and the baby coming, the happy house, her young son so eager to be a brother. Now the story will center on a chapter in which the eagerly awaited baby dies in utero, never to be cuddled and warmed in her arms, never to scream and demand a diaper change, never to suckle her breast. The woman does not want that story. She is not ready for it, for what it will mean, not just now, today, tonight, but forever, for the rest of her life. The weight of that story could crush all other stories of her life and the lives of those she loves. She does not want that. She is too tired and she wants to sleep. She wants to awaken. I place my hand on my belly and tell my baby I love her. Then I open the door. I shuffle slowly back to the room, telling myself this is real with every step. What do I have to do? I ask.
Thank you, Shannon. So it seems like an obvious question to ask, but I know that you both have been asked this question over and over. You've told me that people ask you, why can't you just get over it? Right? Like, it's, and it shouldn't even be a question that somebody should ask, but could you tell us about that question? And I think anyone who hears your story, Shannon, or reads your story, Kalia, would immediately understand why you can't just get over it. But could you talk about that question and how it's been asked of you, and and why women are expected just to get over something that gets at, the heart of your, I don't know, something so powerful.
For me, the question really begins, so I'm Hmong American, that we are not in the history books of America. When people read about American history, they read about the Vietnam War, what happened in the war to the Americans. They don't read about the 32,000 Hmong men and boys commissioned to fight and to die on America's behalf in Laos. They don't write about the countless women and children who were slaughtered in that war. We are secret because the Central Intelligence Agency expected that none of us would surface from the hot, humid jungle where we fell like jungle fruit, rotting among the leaves. And yet here I am. People ask me all the time, who are you and where are you from? And I try to explain, but nothing makes sense until I talk about that war. Nothing makes sense about how I am and who I am until I speak to the undocumented. The same is true of my miscarriage. Who I am as a mother, who I am as a wife, who I am as a daughter, who I am as a friend, who I am as a human being has been I go back to this very, very tiny moment. So 3 months after the miscarriage, I go to my mom and dad's house. And I say that my mom has had 7 miscarriages after I was born. But I'm sitting on their toilet and I'm not crying, but I feel liquid on my thighs. And I look down, Lara, and I notice that it's the milk coming from my chest, from my breast. That without a baby, my body is creating a substance that falls in the wake of my tears. And I start crying because I don't know what to do and I don't quite know how to navigate the moment. And I hear this gentle knock on the outside of the door. And my mom says, I'm here. Kunyano, I am here. And that was enough. That was enough. I knew what was waiting for me when that door opened. In many ways, I imagine that one day when I'm very old, when my children are grown up, and if I don't remember anymore, that this book is here, means that when I open that door, there will be someone there who understands. There will be something there that gets at the heart of who I am. Why is this book necessary? Because I know that that door opens for everyone. And when it is my turn, even if I don't remember anymore, I want it to remind me of myself, what it has costed, what it has given, what it has granted in this experience. Shannon?
Yeah. There's so many parts to that question. Because it's not about getting over. It's really about acceptance, of what is real. This really happened. I grew this person inside of me and they died before they came out. And that is something that is written in my body forever. It's written on my soul. If you believe in souls, and that's not something I have a choice about. And I have a choice certainly about whether I share how that affects me, which is really what that question is pointing to. I don't want you to share this with me because it makes me feel pain. And I don't want that, which is a normal human response. It's misguided because, there's no way you can avoid pain as a human being. I mean, there's plenty of people who try. They usually end up with other problems like addiction and other things, but, no meaningful relationships in their lives and all kinds of things. But it's like, it doesn't work. And the thing about it is like, the reason why I feel pain, such searing pain that just cleaves you, is because of the immensity of the love that I had and still have for my daughter. You can't have one thing without the other. You just can't. That's the problem with this whole grief averse culture. Oh, I just want to be happy. I just want to, well, then you're going to have to be sad sometimes. That's just the way it goes. You can't have one thing without the other. You just can't, and so it's like, people always comment on my two living children, how they will mention their sister all the time. Oh yeah, I've got a sister. Oh, but I've got another one. She's just dead. My son will just say, and people will be like, and he's like, but it's just, to him, it's just a fact, right? Like, and that's his sister, and he loved her, and she's not here now, but, and they make up all kinds of stories. Oh, if CNA were here, we'd have to get a bigger car. Like, it wouldn't be enough, like we have to get another bedroom. Like, there just wouldn't be enough room for her. And she probably left that joke because Maui laughed at it. Whatever. All this stuff. And it's like, my mom was talking to my son recently. They were making this book project together, and they had a whole 2-page spread about CNA. And my mom was like, yeah, some people, they don't like to talk about people they've loved who died. And she said, my Boise's face just fell. He's just like crestfallen. And he's like, why? And she's like, because they don't want to feel sad. And he's like, but she's my sister. And that's just like, it's just this question that doesn't have a response because it answers itself. Like, why did you walk here? Because I walked here. Why do you love me? Because I love you. Like, I don't, in the Buddhist tradition, I'm a Buddhist, we would call it a koan. Like, there's no answer. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That touches on something I've always kind of wondered, the protecting of others from your pain, that 3-month, the traditional 3-month period where you aren't supposed to admit or to tell people that you're pregnant in case you lose the child, in case you have a miscarriage. And I remember telling just my closest family that I was pregnant, and to me, it felt like I wanted the people I loved and who loved me to know I was pregnant so that if I lost the baby, they could gather around me and support me and help me through it. And even more broadly, I feel like though I didn't tell my boss or my friends or anyone else beyond my family, if I were to get pregnant again, I think I would tell everyone widely, as soon as I knew, for just that reason. And it kind of goes back to the ruling last week in, of course, now that I'm on the spot, I'm forgetting. Was it Australia? The Australian?
New Zealand.
New Zealand, thank you. Yes, where women now have a grieving period when they've suffered a miscarriage. Why that isn't the norm in the United States, that probably goes back to ingrained biases about healthcare and women's health. But what I'm getting at is, what do you both think about that 3-month waiting period and how that, or do you agree with me that it protects others from the possibility of your pain, and then ostensibly puts you in a position where if you suffer loss, you're suffering in silence?
I think one of the most beautiful things about that is that it acknowledges that there is a loss to begin with, right? That is, I mean, that is still a question. How many months, how many weeks before a loss becomes valid? Women feel that, you know. Oh, they will say, and they've said to Shannon and me in the process of collecting these stories and putting the collection together, oh, but mine is nothing like yours, or it was too early to there was this whole discomfort around the language. What is valid? What are we allowed to feel in the space and time? 3 months would acknowledge that we've suffered something, we've gone through something, and that our hearts, our body need time to gather itself. And I think that is the gift of an acknowledgement. It is this the kind of the opposite of what goes on in this country and so many other countries, where we're expected to continue with life as if that part of our living bodies had never happened.
And also, it's like, I mean, a loss can happen any time. I mean, just because you make it past 3 months, I mean, my case study is 1 in a million, right? I mean, there's women who have all kinds of predispositions towards, dangerous birth outcomes and all kinds of things. I wasn't one of them. I was in perfect health, and nothing was wrong, and I still lost my baby 10 days after she was due. She was a full-term baby, you know? So, I mean, it's like, I hate to tell people, but it's like, it's a myth. It's this mythology, right? That it's sort of like, oh, it's safe
Mhm.
after 3 months, and it's like, no, there's, and yeah, and then it gets to like, well, who are we really protecting here then?
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Well,
not something you hear about in childbirth classes, right? Or when you go to the hospital tour or anything like that. They don't even talk to, or at least in my case, they didn't even talk about the possibility of a C-section. It was all about like, oh, but none of you probably will need to worry about that. And it's like, of course, most of us probably need to think about what would happen if we need a C-section, and I'd rather know. Um, but yeah, and of course, miscarriage is never mentioned in any of those classes, or like resources in advance just in case you need them. I mean, yeah, and then you're kind of left with trying to seek out your own support or community or resources after the fact when you're least equipped to do so, I'm sure. Yeah. Um, let's see. I know we're at the hour, but I feel like we could keep talking forever. Um, let's see. I wanted to make sure that we covered a couple things. Kalia, you mentioned early on that you wanted to talk about how this experience has changed you as a writer. I think that's a really good question.
So I've always loved languages, and I have a hard time remembering faces and names sometimes, but I don't remember the beautiful words that are spoken around me or to me. Um, and that's always been the thing. But when I suffered the loss, when baby Jules died inside of me, when it was time for me to write again, I had the hardest time trusting words. It was as if the language itself had betrayed me. All of the beautiful words that I'd stored inside my heart for a time when I would need it, none of them were able to do the job. It took having Xingyang, and I want to say this because it is true. If I had never had Xingyang or the boys, if baby Jules was as close as it came for me, that experience would be fundamentally different in my life. But because there was Xingyang, I remember when she was first born, and I was holding I was holding her feet in my hands, and I could feel the throbbing of her heart. And I remember being a child, perhaps 6 years old, and holding my little bird, a bird for the very first time, and feeling the beat of the bird's heart. Something inside of me was able to fly again. because of her. But the flight was now so much more treacherous than I had ever imagined. I knew the fragility of life in a way that I couldn't have conceived of. And now I think whenever I write from this place that cherishes life so much more than before. Before, life was this gift that I'd been granted, and I could explore in any way that I wanted to, run across its terrain, jump and fly, whatever I wanted to do, dig if I wanted. But now there's this kind of gentleness with which I approach all living things because of the loss of the living thing inside of me, because of my own fragile life in the days after. Because there are many moments, Lara, and Shannon knows this, because I've said it before. There were so many moments when if I closed my eyes, I believed I could slow my heart, and I believed I could die right along with baby Jules. Just close my eyes and slow everything down. I never knew that could happen before. And now, because I know that informs everything I do on the page, the sensitivity of my touch, the gentleness of my regard for everything that lives, how hard it is to live. And I wanted to speak to that, how we are forever changed by our experiences, and how these experiences, they enable and embody so much of who we are across the realms of our lives.
Thank you, Kalia. That's so well spent. Shannon, same question to you.
Shannon's holding a living thing in her arms right now.
Yes, my dog. She stole a toy that she should not have had, and so I took it away from her. And now she thinks that meant that I wanted to play with her, which it doesn't. That's not what it means, Layla. Yes, I love you. You need to calm down.
Dogs are welcome.
Unlikely. So, yeah. How did my writing change after this experience? I mean, yeah, like Kalia, I mean, I'm a very high functioning person, and I couldn't do anything for like 2 months, maybe more. I had to have my best friend flew out from New York, and she like organized my friends here into different, tasks. People brought us food, people took out the trash, people washed dishes, people picked up my son and dropped him off at daycare. And I mean, I literally could not do anything. And so, and my body was healing, but it was also like my mind was not there, and it's almost like a shattering, it's just like, and Layla, get out of there. Where's your bone? It took, where's your bone? Where'd you put it? So it took time, for me to kind of come back to the word, to language, to the written word. And I too couldn't write for a while, which is really hard because I mean, writing and reading is really a big part of how I make sense of the world and my experience in it. So that was hard. I wasn't scared about it because I knew it would come back, but when it was time, I think the experience has made me a different kind of parent too, because everything that Kalia said basically, when you've had a loss like that, it's how fragile and lucky you are for all the life that you have, and so I mean, it's definitely, with my daughter, my next pregnancy, it's like hypervigilance, definitely kind of to an unhealthy unhealthy level when she was in utero. And then, when she came out, yeah, I mean, both my children, I mean, I will check on them even still now, if they're sleeping, and, it's like, okay, I just want to make sure they're breathing. Like, no, there's no problem, because you just know it can just be snatched away from you at the smallest moment. And when you're not looking, or maybe even when you are, it's just not up to you at a certain level. And that's both terrifying and also humbling. And also the way it is. It's just how it is, and I feel deeply that if you're writing and you're not telling the truth, then I don't know what you're doing. I don't know why you would write. And then we can't choose the truth that we've been tasked to document. That's what has been given to us, and sometimes it might feel too heavy, and sometimes it might be too heavy, and but that also is how it is. So I feel like it's changed me in so many different ways. Certainly before becoming a mother, I wasn't writing about motherhood. And certainly before, stillbirth and pregnancy loss, I wasn't writing about that or even really thinking about that. And those are definitely huge. They've become huge parts of my writing, in the past 6-7 years, which was something I didn't plan, I didn't anticipate, but that's my life. So it makes sense.
Thank you both so much. I think we've reached time. Kalia, I want to give you a chance if you had anything final to add as well.
I just want to say thank you for having us. And Shannon, Gibney, I want to say this to you. I don't think I've ever formally said these words aloud. Your grace and your generosity as a human being, as a mother, as a friend and a sister has been a gift to me, not only in the making of this book, but in making the world softer and gentler. We know what's going on across this country, particularly with AAPI hate presently. But even in this moment, your friendship and your generosity has somehow made everything easier. It's easier for me to go outside among strangers because I know there are some strangers like you in the world. And so I wanted to say that to you, that yes, our journey began with what God has honored here, but our journey travels far beyond that. Thank you both.
Thank you, Kalia. Kalia is as gorgeous a speaker as she is a writer. As you can tell, she has a song poet father, so you can hear that in her language. So I mean, and I think that that's the other gift, that of this project is just I have a soul friend, a friend of my soul, and that's also somebody that has your back too. And there's unfortunately far too few examples of that for African American women and Asian American women. And so Kalia and I both talk about our friendship publicly, and because we want to model that, for other people, what the possibilities, can look like. And then privately, of course, in our own friendship, it's like we just try to support each other, professionally, personally, but sometimes it's like it can be very hard being a woman of color writer. I mean, being a writer is hard anyway, and then if you come from a historically marginalized community, it's just another level of difficulty. And so we really try to leverage our resources and our knowledge and our connections and all of those things. And so I just also want to thank you, Kalia, for being this real light in my life and through this process. And Lara, thank you for having us on for this really important conversation. Really appreciate you making the time and space.
No, thank you both for joining me, for your honesty, for your advocacy, for your book, and just for yourselves. And for everyone listening, when you go to writermothermonster.com, pretty soon you'll see the video, you'll see the audio, you'll see a transcript, and I'll be sure to follow up with Kalia and Shannon for any resources that they recommend. We had a question about resources. So find more information on the website, as well as our speakers' bios and links to their wonderful work. You can also find their books at bookshop.org, Writer Mother Monster page. So please support their anthology and their other wonderful books. Kalia and Shannon, stick around for a second to say goodbye. And thank you so much to you both. Thank you all for joining us and for listening to this special episode. I hope it touched you all as much as it obviously touched me. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you all and good night.